Happening now, we'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room, episode 80 for for January the 3rd, 2018. My first time to say that on the air. My name is Wes Fryer, and I am coming to you from Oklahoma City. And yes, the same spot as always, if you're happening to watch this live or watch the recorded audio, but we inherited some furniture from my parents, and so the bookshelves have been moved away. But I am the Director of Technology at the Cassidy School and am excited to be back at school. And, you know, seeing so many folks work in retail and thinking about times in my life when I did not have a 2-week Christmas break, which I think probably might be a sore spot. Jason does not. I think he probably, I don't know, we'll ask him how much email he answered over the break. So welcome, Jason, all the way up in cold Missoula.
Good evening, Wes. Yes, my name is Jason Neifer. I'm the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual program that's located on the University of Montana campus. I was telling Wes pre-show, Montana has been dumped on by snow. And so I know that much of the United States is under a cold front, and some wicked Arctic air has kind of swirling around even as far south as Florida. But Montana is used to pretty tough winters, but it feels like we've had a pretty significant snow dump for the last 6 or 7 days here. It feels like we're not quite keeping up with the snow removal process, which is usually a swift and easy piece in a city like Missoula. But yes, the snow is significant here. And to answer your question earlier, Wes, I did not get a full 2-week Christmas break, unfortunately. I'm a university employee that's in a K-12 program, which puts me in a very kind of peculiar schedule. And so we took a couple of long weekends and called it good. And over that time, I did receive some emails, but I was also staffing the phones during that time period. And over the week and a half that our offices were of mixed openings, we received 3 total calls and one was a wrong number. So it was pretty quiet. So I was able to clean up my office a little bit. That's something I need to do once in a while, whether it needs it or not. And I set up a Chrome desktop box at work and reworked some cabling. I did some very nerdy chores. So I'm feeling, swiftly ready for the new year. So for those of you that are joining us for the first time, we ended up on a lot of folks' must-listen-to list. And thank you to everyone that acknowledged our podcast on either your podcast or your blog. But if you're joining us for the first time, the EdTech Situation Room is where Wes and I, once a week, and usually with a guest thrown in every once in a while, go through the week's headlines looking for kind of an educational technology spin on things. And luckily, the news very rarely fails us and provides us interesting things to talk about week in and week out. And if you'd like to check out our links, and we do link to everything we talk about each week, so you can dig a little deeper if that's what your heart desires. You can go to edtechsr.com and you can find everything we talk about there and the links we use to kind of research our stories for the week. So Wes, there's a lot of interesting things going on right now. Where would you like to start this week at EdTech SR?
Well, I think I'd like to talk about CES, but before we talk headlines and trends to watch, I know you have some CES stories because you were there live. So what stands out from you for your in-person CES experience that's been a few years ago now?
Yes. Well, first, it's insane. It's many people there, and it's not like ISTE, and it's not like NCC, which is the Northwest Regional ISTE affiliate conference that I attend each year. It's not even like some of the smaller EdTech events that I've been to in Montana, Idaho, and in Washington. It's all nerds all the time, and the things I remember from it there. First, the sheer amount of kind of tech all-stars there, podcasters and journalists are just kind of out there in the open doing the same thing I was doing there, which is kind of gawking at the items. And also, and I think this is a good place for us to start, and one of the articles I'll look at is to take a look at 12 questions that CES 2018 needs to answer. And I thought, Wes, it would be a great exercise for you and I to answer those questions to see if CES differs from us in its conventional wisdom. But a lot of the products that get pitched and introduced at CES don't actually end up being released. And one of the reasons why that's the case is that CES is a testing ground for a lot of big and small companies alike to pitch ideas that may or may not turn into realities. And in fact, the last couple of years, for those of you that keep an eye on tech journalism, there is a an interesting game that happens in the last week of December, first week of January, where journalists will go back and look at some of the big things that were issues at last year's CES and find out what got released, what was held. Also, if the trends that tend to dominate CES became a trend for the year. And an example I have of that, and I think it was 2010's CES, was the year of the ebook reader. And there were hundreds of ebook readers released by companies big and small at that year's CES, and it looked like that ebook readers were going to become, the tech to get, and that they would be everywhere. $5 ones, $10 ones, $500 ones, all ranges of interesting pieces. And then it turns out that Kindle thoroughly dominated everything in regards to the ebook reader market. So there are still other alternatives. Barnes & Noble has a Nook. There's something called a Kobo. There's a couple Sony offerings that are decent, but the vast majority of e-readers sold in 2018 now are Kindle e-readers from Amazon. So there will be cool stuff announced. There will be headlines announced, but you have to take all of this kind of with a grain of salt, because there isn't a guarantee that any of these products will actually make it to market.
Well, yes, let's take a look at those 12 questions. I'll do a shout out to a New York Times article from today, which says the big tech trends to follow at CES 2018. And as you might expect, talked about, the smart home. And as we'll talk about Alexa, Google Home, being able to talk and get things to happen in your house and that kind of race. But also talking about smart cities, smart cars. But the thing that excited me the most, and again, this isn't something to be excited about quite yet, because it's still like, this is 2020 probably, but it's next generation wireless. And in this article, maybe I've heard this before, but 5G wireless is 100 times faster than 4G. And so you're talking about downloading movie-size files, perhaps in as quick as 5 seconds. So let me throw that question to you, Jason. What is that going to mean for technology in schools if the wireless technology has, is that going to matter? And maybe even for online learning, that might be a game changer in Montana if that reaches, the masses, so to speak. Wouldn't say the masses, but, rural Montana. Live in Missoula and Helena, that might be great, but for the rest, it may not be the case. I don't know. That excited me. That was my
right. Yeah. Well, first and foremost, let's be super clear that not a lot of people have access to consistent 4G. And so it's probably 80, 85, 90% of the population has good, consistent access to 4G wireless. But there's still a serious percentage of particularly rural Americans, and I can speak from that from the Montana standpoint, that just don't have access to the fast wireless internet that a lot of folks in urban areas do. And it's a little complex, because it's not just about the fact that maybe towers don't exist, that have the newest technology in them in rural areas. In a lot of cases, the lack of competition in rural areas is also a problem too. And so in Montana, we effectively have two major carriers in Montana. We have Verizon and AT&T. I've never been an AT&T customer, and I, for a long time, was a Verizon customer. And T-Mobile is finally starting to make its way into Western Montana. That's now my carrier, because a year ago, they kind of unofficially launched in Missoula, and so I'm now a full-time T-Mobile customer. And it's after a year, and it was supposed to take a year to get across the state, they're still struggling to get from border to border in Montana. Now, to be clear, for those of you who don't understand the distances involved in Montana, I'm in Western Montana in Missoula, and I'm about an eight and a half hour drive from Seattle. To get to the other side of the state of Montana from Missoula, it can be upwards of an 11-hour drive. So I am closer to the West Coast than I am to Eastern Montana. It's a massive size state, the fourth largest state geographically, and East Montana is not particularly populated, which means that there is little incentive for companies to come in and do the good work of providing those services, telecom services, wirelessly to places in Montana. So 5G could be a really amazing thing, particularly for mobile learning, right? Mobile learning tends to be a little more video dominant because that's a good device. The size of devices means that's a useful piece. Learning objects would trump long reading in a mobile learning environment, and that I think could stand to utilize really interesting things related to that, especially if the major wireless carriers continue to offer their unlimited plans with 5G internet. And the other piece that's really interesting to me about the prospect of 5G, again, being 100 times faster than 4G internet, is that means it is going to be faster than almost everyone's home connection. And at that point, that starts to shake up the market quite a bit. I don't think I could quite get away with running all internet through my phone in the way I use internet right now, but I have noticed that when I travel, in fact, part of the reason why I picked up a T-Mobile signal was that our T-Mobile line was that I wanted the ability to utilize this as a mobile hotspot. I've been able to, for days and days and days and days and days, only utilize the internet on my phone with my laptop and it being perfectly fine to do what I wanted to do. If that's at 1, 5, 10, 15 gigabit speed, that's massively fast, that's really tempting to me as a consumer.
So we always bring things back to an educational lens, and I think we need to mention briefly net neutrality, and then let's jump into some of those CES questions. We did talk about on the show a couple times, several times this year, the net neutrality votes and the things that are going on with the FCC. It's going to be really important for us to watch what our large carriers and ISPs do now that the net neutrality rules have basically been washed away, and the gloves are off for them to do what they want. And I think it reminds me of something that happened when I worked for AT&T. So 2 years of my life, I worked as an education advocate for AT&T. That's what brought me to Oklahoma in 2006. And I had a conversation with one of our executives that we were talking about community wireless. And AT&T really doesn't have an interest in communities doing their own Wi-Fi. And the big thing there was return on investment. And it's to what you're saying about Eastern Montana and these rural areas. We have a fantasy today, not to go too political here, but a fantasy today in the United States that, if we just leave it to the market, everything is going to be freaking wonderful for everyone. And the fact is, universal service for phones, meaning that wherever you were and are in the United States, phone service will be brought to you. That has been an essential part of the telecommunications values of our country since we started to have phones and it became a reality for people. And so I think there's an important advocacy piece here, which even fits into digital citizenship and students being educated not only about what net neutrality is, but also what is the proper role and place for regulation? Is there a proper role? And if so, what is that proper role in trying to provide for things like bridging the digital divide, providing universal access? And there's been some interesting articles and conversations about, how much internet do you need, and the ISP saying you really just need, 3 gigs, or there's some kind of a cap. And I think that the fact that internet is treated differently today by wireless carriers, right? So generally you're going to have some kind of a data cap for most carriers. T-Mobile's been wonderful as far as unlimited, but generally an unlimited plan is going to reach a cap where it's going to be slowed down. All of that stuff is going to be pretty important to track. And I think that we need to talk about these kinds of things with students and find ways to engage them in these discussions, because it's pretty important. And we're, going in a good direction as far as speed and access and things like that. But it doesn't mean everybody is going to get the access. And it also doesn't mean that, just hands off the market is gonna lead to nirvana for everybody in terms of their access.
And then I think in terms of access for schools too, I think 5G does present an interesting challenge from schools from this standpoint. There's a prominent former tech director in Montana that now does private tech work for school districts. His name's Jeff Patterson, and he used to say something a couple of years ago that he would echo over and over and over again. He said, however much bandwidth you have right now, plan to triple it. And he said there's not a district he works with in Montana that advice isn't good advice. And that includes districts that were bringing in, gigabit, combined gigabit speed, for large districts to do that. But he said you're going to have to triple it in the near future and then triple it after that. Well, if in a world where we're providing Wi-Fi to students to get them to go through the filter, right? And, I don't know if Wes and I have ever gotten to the filter rant on this show, but filtering is important to your district, and you're providing internet access to students so that you can filter it, right? They're using their phones to get on their district internet so that they have a filtered experience while they're sitting in the confines of your school. 5G internet, assuming it delivers on the promise of speed, even at a fraction of what they're advertising, is going to blow away your network, period. It will be much faster than what is currently available in either fiber-based internet. If that's true, your students will, be camping out outside of windows, under windows in classrooms to access the 5G outside, not just because it's unfiltered, although I think that's less important to students than the fact that their YouTube videos will come up lightning fast on their phones because of that 5G internet access. And honestly, ignoring the fact that a lot of schools can or won't invest in super broadband for their school, it may not even be available in most places, right? If you get outside of cities the size of Spokane, Seattle, Portland, Boise, in the Pacific Northwest, there aren't a lot of options. In Missoula, Montana, there's really just a handful of options, and most of them are based on cable or DSL-based internet. Big districts here combine several services into one massive pipe to do that, but even if they wanted to, couldn't go much farther than what is currently available there. So that's another twist here, is that if 5G is 100 times faster than 4G, and 4G in some cases is already much faster than some open Wi-Fi connections in schools, will that really challenge then schools to then kind of buttonhole access into their district network?
Well, let's jump into some of these CES questions. And if you're not aware, shout out to Peggy George there in our chat room. There's a great hashtag to follow here as CES kicks off. CES is the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. And I think the official hashtag is just CES 2018. That was the one that was popping up for me for Twitter. It definitely, I would just say at the outset, we risk and this happens a lot in technology with the ISTE conference and other things, really getting overly excited about the shiny and the new and perhaps, losing track of hopefully what should be our goal, which is how does this support learning? Where does this let me go that I couldn't go before? Back to last week's show with Beth Holland, where she was talking about a process that we should all go through as teachers, where we think about the content and the ideas that we want to share with students and the skills that we want them to acquire. And then what are the different ways that students can engage with that information? It can be sticky for them. They can, interact with the information, make it their own, and then demonstrate an understanding of that or an ability to, fluently use that and express that. So, Jason, of the 12 questions, we probably don't have time to do them all, but we can do a few. Which one do you think is the most engaging, and you want to take a shot at it first?
Sure, let's do the first one, because I think this is going to impact classrooms more and more for a reason that I'll talk about at the end of our discussion here. Will Alexa have a competitor? I think is the big question here. And intelligent personal assistants, or IPAs, as I mentioned in the past, is some of the focus of my personal research as part of my doctoral studies at the University of Montana. By the way, side note for Wes, I filled out my graduation form today. And what's interesting about the IPS debate is that in the last 3 years, we went from almost every conversation being about how will Siri disrupt the world to now how will Amazon and Alexa disrupt the world, because Siri is still only available on mobile devices, and a lot of people would argue that the user experience is not very good. Google Assistant is available in a home device, the Google Home, which I think is a fine Internet of Things device, but all the energy seems to be around the Alexa. And the reason why I know that is because most of my family members received Alexas for Christmas, which is always the sign that it has gone completely mainstream when my family kind of tips over into one technology. It happened with flat screen TVs, it happened with cell phones, now it's happening with Alexa. And I think that that's an interesting phenomenon. So lots of products being released at CES this year that have Alexa built into it or talk to the Alexa Internet of Things network. They're called Skills on the Alexa through Amazon. Wes, can anything beat the big beast of internet connected devices?
Well, I'm hoping specifically that Google is going to be now that we are the owners of 4 Google Minis. I don't know if I said that on the show, but that was Santa Claus's big gift to Wes this year. There were two technologies that pushed me over the edge. One was the broadcast, where I can go to my smart assistant and say broadcast, and it'll say that to all the speakers in the house. We use that in the house, not on a daily basis, but several times a week. Sometimes when I'm away from home, but even when we're here, hey, it's time to eat. Have your own intercom system, and then the simultaneous being able to stream Pandora or Google Play Music in all of them. My wife, I just learned today at dinner, has announced to her 3rd grade class that they will be getting a smart assistant. And so I guess I was thinking about getting a Google Home, since that's what we have now, but maybe it would be fun for them to have an Alexa, and then she can, compare, because it's challenging to think about watching exponential growth. And at CES, you kind of see that in terms of where are the TVs today? How many more pixels are they packing in, and where are the processors? And we used to be watching that race to just more RAM and more speed, and that's plateaued a little bit. But with the smart assistants, we're really seeing an intriguing race. And unlike most products where you purchase them today, and yes, you can install software on a computer and that will make it protean. Great Scrabble word for you there, and allow it to do more things than it could do before. A smart assistant, oh my gosh, it really, this is I guess 1 year old news, but you can order a Starbucks from your Alexa. Last January, Starbucks announced they rolled it out in just small markets, but I think it's everywhere. If you've got like the iOS app, maybe, and hopefully Android as well, since I'm an Android user now, you can specify what your favorite Starbucks drink is, and you can just say, hey, Miss A, will say to those people, as I should have said the word earlier, or Madam A, whatever we want to call her, order my usual at Starbucks, and it'll initiate that order at your favorite store. So we know AI is gigantic. We know that Google has announced its entire product line is switching from a mobile first to an AI first worldview. And so, I purchased the Google Home, with a bet on Amazon. I'm going to just flip all my terms here, with a bet for Google. Because I think Google has so much, capability with all the information that they have, and I honestly don't think Google is an evil company. I drank the Kool-Aid and I'm still sipping it today, and I'm a little bit more wary about Amazon and the ways in which I guess I'm a little bit more comfortable with a company that's out to advertise to me than one that's out to dominate all retail. So, do you think I should encourage Shelley to get an Alexa for the classroom, or stick with the Google Home, Jason, or are you neutral on that?
Well, as you know, Wes, we have both, and we have a Google Home that's literally sitting quite near the Google Home. So we have them right next to each other, and so we can go back and forth. And what's interesting is that not just me, but my wife and our exchange students, I guess my temporary son, they're able to go back and forth too, because they learn fairly quickly what and I shouldn't say that word either, the Divine A and the Google Home do better, right? As an example, that Alexa, the Divine Miss A, does a great job with skills, right? Because you can install extension skills that do all sorts of amazing things. But the Google Home, in my humble opinion, backed by Google Search, does a way better job at things like factual checks when we're doing dinner discussions, and those pieces. And that's one of the reasons why that, from an educational standpoint, I'm still a little surprised that Siri hasn't taken off more in classrooms. But more importantly, like Alexa I don't think is going to be as much of an educational tool, right? Google's got Google backing it, right? The Google Home has got Google backing it. Siri has, well, also has Google too, although I think it kind of keeps going back and forth. I think right now it's backed by Bing search, but I think they're going to go back to Google because it's better. But the other piece of it too is they have Wolfram Alpha also integrated into the Siri search too. So from a classroom standpoint, I think the Google Home and the Siri devices, and at some point they're going to have a speaker available, although it keeps getting pushed, that is probably a better classroom tool. And that's what makes, I think, the rise of the Divine Miss A little more complex from an educational standpoint, because I think it's cooler and I think it's more functional unless you want to ask it questions. And that's where I think the Google and Siri platforms happen to dominate.
Awesome. All right. What other questions should we tackle here?
Well, I guess I would say briefly talking about one of the big things about CES every year is televisions, and the way the CNET article that we're going to this week in terms of where does TV and display tech go from here. And I guess I would maybe just pose the quick question is, how many Ks do you need before it's going to be, more than you could possibly fill it with actual media? This year, apparently, there are reasonably priced is probably the wrong term. We're talking about $5,000 and $6,000 television sets, but 80-inch 8K televisions are being shown off at CES this year. I'll be honest, I don't even have a 1080p television at home. We have a 32-inch 720p television, and I've never been a super big screen kind of a guy, except for monitors. That's a whole different story. But with televisions, I've never seen the need for it. But it seems like now you can go out, as in a classroom, for example, you can buy 55, 65-inch televisions at 1080p, some cases 4K televisions for $400, $500, $600.
No, we've gotten them for $250, $320 from Amazon, Insignia 55-inch. That is our standard price. So my educational lens for this is, do we need 4K? Do we need 5K? Did we need 3D? No. But it really is a wonderful thing in the classroom to kind of go a little bit lower tech. I mean, we've been using the LED bulbless projectors from Epson, and I think that's right. And those have been good, but it's even easier to just have a TV remote control. Your audio is built right in, HDMI. It's been wonderful. And so over the last 2 years, year and a half, I've been helping, and I guess orchestrating an upgrade to projection at our school, where we had in our middle school and our elementary, what we call our lower school, projectors that were 9 and 10 years old. These are like sub 1,000 lumen projectors that were just really not great at all. And so when we looked at projectors, it was about, and these prices have changed a little bit, but it was about $750 a year or so ago to get, it was a 2,200 lumen projector. That's now a 2,600 lumen. Sometimes we could get that for a little bit less, but the TV was about $350. So we could get an Apple TV plus a television, but you've got to think about screen size. And it really does need to be a bit of a smaller room for a 55-inch TV to be great. We've had some larger classrooms. We have one where a teacher who was an early adopter of that, went ahead and went back to a projector and a larger, projected image. So for me, the biggest thing here on what comes next, when you consumerize technology, that changes the game, right? And in seeing smartphones and, kids coming to school, we don't really need to buy camcorders for school anymore, because there are so many smart devices that can take pictures and take video, and students can bring that, into another computer or via the web, a cloud-based WeVideo scenario, that there's ways that they can edit. So I'm excited for the continued consumerization of television in terms of its greater capabilities and especially size, because only in the last year, I think, now we can order a 65-inch TV for less than $1,000. I think the last ones that we ordered, and we've got a couple now, was something like $950. And so seeing 65-inch push 70, 55-inch is a pretty big jump in terms of price when you're looking at buying. And certainly when you go beyond 65 up to 70 or 80, you're talking multi-thousands dollars. So I'm excited to see that, and we'll be, continuing to, I think, work with our faculty. We're part of the deal is, we are providing multimedia in each classroom. So you have a projection device, you have a laptop, you've got audio, you've got Wi-Fi, but we've actually got some. What is that audio?
Hold on, my phone's something weird. Keep going.
Okay. You've got we're giving teachers a choice about what they're interested in or what they think would best meet their needs, because a lot of folks didn't need a smart board, and we had a lot have had a lot of smart boards in there. So anyway, I'm excited about that, and I think you need to watch Best Buy, Jason, because when they decrease the prices, and they will on those 55-inch Insignias, I was able to do an order for school where it was $250. In fact, with our own money, of course, we're not using school money to get stuff at home, but I went ahead on the side and said, okay, for $250, we're going to get a new television. And that was like, wow.
Well, and I know, and I believe this actually for quite some time, but there is no way I would go back into a classroom with a projector. Like, a television would be absolutely what I would use there for no other reason. I know projector bulbs have moved to technologies that don't burn out as easily, but you can keep a TV on 24/7 for years and years and years and years and years, and the bulb never burns out in the backlight of that television, whereas projectors have a shelf life to them, and they overheat all the time, and they're full of technology that tends to fail with aggressive use where television does not. So yeah, I'm with you 100%. I think the almost commoditization of large TVs, whether they're your 4K, 8K, or just 1080p, I think is a great benefit to us all. So
Peggy's encouraged us to talk a little bit about Apple Battery Gate. So why don't we shift to that? And Jason, was it a surprise to you to learn that Apple slows down their devices when they get older, in part to, I guess, improve the user experience? I mean, that ostensibly that was why they said they were doing this, or why analysts said that, correct?
Right. Well, yeah. And my guess is, if you're listening to this podcast, this news has been something that you've been following closely. But the too long didn't bother to discuss part of this is that someone had figured out that their phone, which they'd had for some time, that had several battery cycles on it, had slowed down to almost a fourth of its original speed from a clock speed standpoint. And after digging into some code and then approaching Apple directly about it, Apple came clean and said that for phones that have batteries that have been compromised, and what I mean by compromised is they've been cycled so many times they're starting to lose their ability to kind of keep juice for a long amount of time, right? So batteries don't last as long after the 100th, 200th, 300th cycle. They slow down the phone in order to keep battery life stable. Now, the way Apple announced this was a little different. They said it wasn't about keeping battery life long. They said that they were experiencing issues with the phones to where older batteries, the phone would shut down prematurely before the battery was actually out, because the batteries they were using tend to become unstable at lower amounts of charge. That's a little more of a plausible scenario than just the battery wasn't lasting as long. But Apple came clean and announced that they were going to, as part of a makeup for this, replace batteries in, I think it's iPhone 7, 7S's, and I guess 7 and 7S, maybe it goes back to 6S, and 7S, for $29, which is like a third of the price they would charge otherwise to get the battery replaced. So first I should ask Wes, is this impacting any of the Friar House iPhones?
It does. We actually replaced batteries on an iPhone 5, which has since been updated, and then on, I think, an iPhone 5 Plus, and, it's about a $70 deal. Peggy was asking how you check the cycles. I know on the Mac, you can go up to the Apple and say, about this Mac, and when you click on System Report, you can get some very detailed information about all kinds of things with your device, including your battery. And it'll talk about, how many charges you've had. I'm not sure if you can get this just from looking at the iPhone, if you've got to take it in, but Apple keeps all of that kind of documentation. So yes, we have had to buy additional batteries, and, the number one thing I've loved the most about my Android phone has been the 500 milliamp battery, and the fact that it lasts so long, relative to the Apple one. So I liked you put in that Recode article from I guess December 28th. Apple's response to its iPhone slowdown controversy is good and a lesson to be more proactive about communicating. And there's a good contrast there into what was called at the time Antennagate, which they said Apple had sold 60 million iPhones at that point. And that was Steve Jobs responding, and it sold more than 1 billion now. And anyway, just kind of kudos for Apple in the way that they handled this. Because like you said, if it's presented as, hey, your battery's unstable, it's not able to do what it needs to do, we're just trying to manage your phone a little more and keep it stable. Anyway, it seems like they've handled that well, and it's important to see how companies and individuals respond to the latest controversy. And so I think Apple has done a good job responding to this. So I think, didn't I read somewhere that they're going to offer something like a reduced battery update, maybe $29 or something?
Yeah, $29 is the price right now. And before, it was only if your phone had shown signs that the battery was significantly worn. They were going to do a test on it, and I think it had to be below 80% battery health, which is a pretty torn down battery. 80% battery health, you might be only getting a couple hours a day out of a battery at 80% health. But apparently that they have turned on that and will now replace any battery for $29. And what that's also done too is it's torn down the pricing of third-party replacement batteries. For example, iFixit, which is a company that helps you basically take apart your electronics. They sell kits and release guides on how to tear down electronics. They are now cutting the price of their Apple iPhone battery replacement kit to, I think it's down to under $29, like $25 or $20. The battery itself is only like a $4 or $5 product, and then they want to sell you the tool set to be able to do it yourself. And my understanding is in big cities that have thriving marketplaces for third-party battery replacements, the price of iPhone battery replacement is also going down. And so there may be a significant upside. I agree with that article that talked about how Apple did a pretty good job of communicating this. They didn't obscure the story at all. They came out very cleanly to describe what their process was. But the one thing I would criticize Apple for is they should have made this a consumer choice. I think that it would be easy to put in. You could even hide it in settings so only advanced users know where to find this, but it's a simple one. Prioritize battery life or prioritize speed, and that's all you need to do. Right, one toggle and set it to prioritize a battery life, because that's what Apple prides itself on. And let's be super clear, mobile-wise, there's no competitor to the stability across the whole range of products that Apple provides for mobile battery times. I mean, I've had iPads that sat in a box for 6 weeks that came in a full charge, and I fire it up 6 weeks later and it still has a 74% battery. It's really unreal. But really, Apple should have given choices to consumers here. And quick shout out to Peggy. I've put a link in the show notes from Phone Arena. Apple blocks third-party apps from checking battery cycles, but apparently there's a piece of software you can download to a Mac or PC, plug your iPhone into the USB port on your computer, and there's a piece of software that comes with a 7-day free trial that tells the number of cycles that your iPhone battery has gone through.
And if you happen to have an Apple store, which there's obviously not one of those in every town, but in the larger metropolitan areas, we're fortunate to have one here. I think we're maybe one of the smaller areas in the country to have one. You can go in, meet with a genius, and they will plug it into their magical system, and they can tell you all kinds of additional diagnostic things about that. It'll be interesting to see if those same kind of tools become available to us. You can net boot your Mac laptop, and then there are some ways to access some of their diagnostic tools via the web. And as mobile continues to march forward, it'll be interesting to see if some of those become accessible and available to us. So
yep. Absolutely. And, battery, in fact, that's one of the questions that's in that CES 12 Questions article. Battery's still not where it needs to be with mobile devices, right? There's lots of very encouraging news. Microsoft's news a couple weeks ago that they are going to release an ARM-based laptop that has a 24-hour battery life. That's all really interesting. But the bottom line is that isn't battery technology being better. That's CPU technology being better, and the hardware and software platforms, sipping battery at a lower rate. But we still need a battery revolution somewhere. And I keep thinking that Elon Musk in the 3 brain cycles the guy has left during the day when he's off inventing other things, should be spending some time on the mobile battery issue, because let's be honest, batteries run the world now, and almost all of the devices we utilize, especially now that laptops dominate desktops and mobile devices dominate laptops in consumer sales, our devices are battery driven. And so I think, revolutionizing this technology. And Wes, am I making this up? Were there stories 4 or 5 years ago that Apple had some secret lab project that was going to, release new battery technologies, and it was coming soon, and yada yada yada? Or am I making that up? Was it just
it could have been it could have been a rumor? Yeah, I mean, all kinds of rumors flying around, but I don't remember that being. I don't remember that. So
yeah, someone do this. Like it's time,
Right.
and I know for a fact that there's lots of universities, for example, that are doing work in this area. But man, could we use a battery revolution in the worldwide?
Yep, absolutely. Well, hey, where would you like to go next? We got a couple good possibilities.
We might have buried the lead a little bit here, and in fact, this is such a news story that I feel obligated to play our breaking news bumper.
Dun 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 dun. Oh, you actually got a bumper.
And of course my.
This is what you get with a live show, folks. There's no editing here.
The lamest thing ever. That's our breaking news bumper. So there was a story that was released this afternoon, and this was actually leaked a couple days ago, and there hasn't been as much media around it. And in the last 6 hours, there's been an extraordinary release of articles across the tech news universe. But there it goes, just a moment late. So... man,
for the record, is that your Android phone playing that?
It is my Android phone playing that. Oh,
a little slower. All right.
Yeah, I know. So apparently that there has been a found vulnerability in Intel-based chips on CPUs in both desktop, laptop, and mobile platforms. Now, here's the piece here that's really interesting. Most of this news earlier this week was related to Intel having a flaw, but as it turns out, AMD processors, which are popular in laptops and desktops, and apparently ARM-based processors, because Google has announced that they are patching vulnerabilities in Android phones, which there are Android platforms that run on what's so-called x86 or Intel-style hardware, but the vast majority of phones run on ARM processors, right? So that's interesting to me, that this apparently is a massive hole across many architectures of processors. Now, the best I understand the vulnerability, apparently there's some issue related to caching of data on chips themselves that can then be accessible to hackers that have access to your, I don't even think you can get physical access, but somehow could utilize a software service to pull data off of that memory. Now, the reason why this is interesting to me is not just because it was so desperate that Microsoft released a patch already for Windows 10. So if you're a Windows 10 user, keep an eye on your updates in the next 24 to 48 hours and install any update that's there. If you're in a school district that is pausing updates, or you're 6 months back on updates, consider going to the most recent updates to make sure you're getting all the security patches for this. And although there's been seemingly no vulnerabilities in the wild at this point, a lot of tech journalists are saying this is possibly apocalyptic because of the extraordinary amount of data that can be sucked off of a device that have these chips. But here's the interesting part of this. They can't fix this from a hardware standpoint because, they're not going to show up at your house with a screwdriver and start digging around your CPU. So they're fixing it with software solutions. And all the articles that I've read earlier this week, when this was just a rumor, suggested that this may substantially slow down both Windows and Mac platforms because most of the available fixes are very cumbersome and add a ton of pressure on the central processing unit, so the core of your computer, to where it will be visibly slower to you as an end user. So I guess to start with, Wes, any initial reactions to the threat of this?
Yeah, it reminds me, if you all want to go back to episode 78, so 2 episodes ago, had an article from University of Michigan News, Unhackable Computer Under Development with $3.6 million DARPA grant. What that research project is trying to do, if I'm reading it right, is randomize the location of where things are saved to address security vulnerability issues. And that's a futuristic thing, right? That's not a current technology. I think it's super interesting. It reminds me a little bit. We haven't turned on deep packet inspection on our firewall at school, and what that allows you to do is to crack open packets and see inside for what people are streaming. But it really can put a major bog down on your firewall, and you've got to have a pretty new firewall and a really fast one to be able to do that and handle that kind of processing. Well, similarly, it sounds like that's what the software is going to require here. So I don't know. It's also, to what degree is this going to be exploited? And because we have vulnerabilities in theory, and sometimes, with Apple in particular, we would see people do a lot of wing flapping and, being concerned. And it's like, yeah, this is theoretically possible. And I don't know how much, in the wild that this kind of thing is going to be exploited. But it is interesting to see that. I think one of those articles, the TechCrunch article from January 3rd, Google's Project Zero team discovered critical CPU flaw last year. We've talked a few times on the show about this idea where when you have vulnerabilities that are identified, should security agencies hide those and be able to use those for national spying, or should they go ahead and report those directly so they can be fixed? And, in this case, you've got evidently one of the largest flaws. I don't know if this has a precedent in terms of the numbers of impacted devices. And, part of what's brought this out is folks have seen developers, scrambling to try and cover this. So again, it's theoretical. We've got a lot of fear of this. I want to read more about, what the actual exploitation of this has been. And you can bet that there's folks, because this is a game, right, that hackers and folks play all the time, is that a vulnerability is out there, and things that are announced and things that aren't announced publicly, they're trying to exploit. So it sounds bad, sounds like it doesn't have a precedent, but I think I need to read more before I get really worried and concerned. It could be a reason to upgrade, though, because if you're running in older systems and the fix is going to require significantly more processing power, that could increase your refresh cycle perhaps at school, because you're going to, your machines that you thought were going to be lasting 5 years may not, because of the slowdown that they're going to have after this patch is applied.
The other thing I would note is that you mentioned that the Project Zero, the articles from TechCrunch, and the other reason why I like that article is because it talks about that Google has already patched its Google Apps and G Suite software to prevent any issue there. I know that Chrome OS its next update will include a patch for this. Windows 10 is released a patch already for this. I wouldn't be surprised if there's an emergency patch by Mac OS in the next 48, 72 hours, and I hope it doesn't. I have an older but still a fairly speedy iMac at work that I hope survives that particular patch with its kind of speediness. But this seems to be happening a lot. Earlier this year, it was the Wi-Fi vulnerability that required patching.
WannaCry.
Yeah.
One, right? The NSA had that whole, forget what it was called, the toolkit that got put out in the wild, and then WannaCry, and that was the unprecedented thing where Microsoft released patches to Windows XP, which they had said was put to bed without any future updates.
Right.
I guess that's one of my other thoughts that relates as far as school technology is, what is your enterprise organizational patch policy? How often are you updating machines? We still have some computer labs, running around. And of course, we've got, carts of mobile devices. With Chrome, not a problem, right? We got that set in the admin console to randomize updates, and nothing is really running on the beta channel. It's all the stable channel, but that just happens as the computers get used, right? A Chromebook boots in 8 seconds and a few more seconds to download the new update, and boom, there you go. But, with lab computers, we use deep freeze to basically lock things in place so students are not, trashing systems or, downloading viruses, et cetera. It just makes everything boot up, clean. The security environment today is very different. And so personally thinking about our school, this is a discussion that we're having right now, is how are we going to basically reduce the amount of time that we've been waiting between security patches, because these things can be significant, and and sometimes that's hard to know. Is this significant enough for me to go to all the difficulty of making sure I roll out a patch? And also, I just say on an IT standpoint, we're not doing this on the Windows side, but on the Mac side, we run a caching server. We run an Apple OS X server that theoretically, and I'm not sure that this is working for all VLANs and subnets and everything, but theoretically what is supposed to happen, and does happen in a lot of cases, is the first time somebody downloads a patch, it downloads to that local server, and thereafter the Apple devices, instead of going out to the internet and taking that bandwidth and probably slowing things down for everybody, they get it locally from that local machine. So it's something I know that some of our partner schools or peer schools do on the Windows side. I think you kind of have to be doing some sophisticated stuff with policies and some other Active Directory stuff that we're actually not doing and into. But these are issues to look at. And again, I'd say kudos to Google getting it patched. And hey, with Chrome, we've already got a strategy in place, and it was just a click box in the admin console. I would like to see that same kind of ease of patchability that we have with Google, on the Mac and the Windows side.
I would have one other thought about your mention of older Windows XP boxes is something that just looked it up. 7% of all world computers still run Windows XP, and it's funny because I know that Steve Gibson, the host of Google Now Security Now on the Twit network, talks about how if you don't run it in administrative mode, that Windows XP is quite secure still, and it's the most adapted operating system in the world. But even though Microsoft did go back and patch older versions for the WannaCry thing, I can't imagine that every major threat, and this seems to be happening every couple of months now, right? We had 2 or 3 of them in 2017. We're starting off 2018 with a brand new one. As more and more of these threats are uncovered, I can't imagine that Microsoft will go back and patch everything that pops up as a particular threat, which means if you are using Windows XP in your school still, and I get it, right? Computers are expensive, yada, yada, yada. You got to upgrade, because the software is not going to last or be secure forever. And, I would agree with Wes. That is part of what makes the Chrome model, so persuasive. But I will note that the Chromebook Pixel 2013, the first Pixel released by Google, so it's a very premium high-end laptop, it goes out of updates May 2018. So 6 months from now, that laptop, even though it's still a premium laptop by every measure, it's a usable machine. It's something that I am proud to carry around in a bag, even though I got it for dirt cheap. It's going to stop being updated, right? And Google's changed its policies. Newer laptops are 6.5 years now when they release Chromebooks. But when you have high-end hardware like that, Google, you gotta understand that people will probably use it well past its intended shelf life. And I will continue to use my Google Pixel 2013, even if it no longer provides the updates, or at least for the time being, because it's a premium piece of hardware. So another thing to keep in mind.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we've got time for, I think, a few more articles. Peggy has just shared actually a good additional one that I'll put in that list from the Register kernel memory leaking Intel processor design forces Linux Windows redesign. I'd like to briefly mention under the privacy heading, an article from the New York Times on January 1st called How Antivirus Software Can Be Turned into a Tool for Spying. And we've mentioned on the show before that Kaspersky, which is a Russian-based antivirus, anti-malware, program, last year, the Department of Homeland Security told all federal agencies to stop using Kaspersky because they believed it was being used by the Russian intelligence agencies to spy on the United States. And this article from the New York Times says a couple interesting things. Kaspersky, which, full disclosure, is the antivirus tool that we're using in our school. I don't think we have classified U.S. secrets, and so I don't think we're at risk here in terms of that. But it says a couple things. Number one, that the Israelis allegedly had been watching. They had done some basically hacking of Kaspersky, and they had watched Russian operatives basically pull off, classified information off of different machines. But the biggest thing in this is it was reverse engineering. And what they showed was you don't have to hack Kaspersky. You can hack the machine, but then access the essentially like definition files that it's using to identify malware. And in the article, it talks about a short, not shortcut, but abbreviation that is oftentimes used for secret documents, TS/SCI, which stands for Top Secret Sensitive Compartmentalized Information. And so they simply added that text as a rule within Kaspersky's antivirus program, like within the definitions, and then boom, immediately it picks up that document. Now it gets more interesting too, because Kaspersky asks you to give permission to quarantine things and then to send it up to their servers, so they'll be able to, identify what that threat is and be able to mitigate it. And so anyway, you could theoretically, with Kaspersky being hacked in this way, find keywords that you wanted to have, and it could be part of a pretty sophisticated way of pulling information and documents off of a machine. So I don't know. It's from a school standpoint, and this doesn't change what I've said before. We're not going to be rushing off to change our Kaspersky license, which a year or so ago I think we signed a five-year contract for additional licensing. But we need to be very aware of the potential risk which antivirus software does open up. As it says in the article, antivirus and anti-malware, the way they describe it is it runs closest to the bare metal of a computer. So it has very privileged access to essentially everything that's on your computer. And I didn't run antivirus for a long time on my Mac at all. We're running at home Bitdefender that we've licensed with a family license, and then school we're using Kaspersky. So Jason, does this news cause you to think any differently about antivirus both at home and at work? And what's your take?
The most recent advice I've heard from kind of a tech journalist was Leo Laporte, who's the host of This Week in Tech and the kind of empire builder of the Twit radio network. He doesn't use antivirus anymore, and it's because he feels as though, and he's talked in the past about, what evidence he has of this, and he's certainly not the only one, but he said that it tends to cause more problems than it solves. In other words, if you're using good technique and you're careful, it's going to be better than opening up all sorts of holes in your system with antivirus software. And so I'm pretty mixed on this. I have never used antivirus. Actually, that's not true. Very briefly, I used antivirus software on the Mac platform. Now I don't use it at all. On the PC, there is a one free version that's the Lifehacker recommended free antivirus, and it's like a Vira, I think is the name of the antivirus software. It seems relatively non-intrusive compared to other antivirus software, but I think it's a real issue. And I think that the threat of antivirus software is through things like free antivirus software, right? Like if you're looking to get out of paying $39, $59, $109 a year, and there is a well-recommended piece of software that's free, well, one of the ways that people make things free is by selling data, by advertising, by opening up holes in systems to insert not necessarily malware, but adware or things you wouldn't otherwise install. And so I think this marketplace is, I think Kaspersky, one of the most trusted names of computer security on earth, not just even antivirus. I'm talking about computer security. Now that there's a cloud of suspicion around them, it further throws that market into turmoil. And I think we're going to have to take some time to figure out what this looks like. And my guess is in the next 3 to 5 years, antivirus is going to look vastly different, and the way we treat security is going to look vastly different.
My personal mission themes for 2018 remain the same from 2017: to be safe, be connected, and tell stories. And on the be safe note, I'll just say what I've probably mentioned previously, and learning this from different network security seminars and workshops I've been a part of, it's all about layers of defense. It's not about one thing. I've got that antivirus software and I'm all good. It's about multi layers. And so it really is critical for us in schools to be, I think, continuing to upgrade firewalls and to look at the ways in which, next generation firewalls and the kinds of threat analysis and detection tools, how we're detecting those kind of things. A step that I guess I'll disclose we are not doing yet, but it's been costly, is the whole intrusion detection, right? When you have something going on that's spewing packets and sending things that it should not be, are our networks at schools smart enough to be able to detect that, be able to quarantine that, and basically protect the rest of the network from, those kinds of threats. And so this is an important conversation to have, and it would be one that I'd love, and maybe we could do this at an ed camp or something like that with some tech directors. Hey, what are you guys doing with antivirus? And if we think about the layers of your network defense strategy or your digital, protection strategy for in clients as well as servers and the whole kit and caboodle, what are you doing different today in 2018 than you were doing last year or the year before? And I definitely think that it's with the landscape being as dynamic as it is, as we've said, it's kind of a love fest for Google. Chrome definitely makes a lot of this stuff pretty easy. It's the legacy systems that are older that tend to be more challenging, and so we need smart networks, and we also want smart users. So to the point of possibly not running antivirus, but making sure that we're being smart and safe with the things that we click on and the ways that we're using the web.
Absolutely so. So is there a final quick topic we want to do, or should we geek of the week it?
Well, I'd love for you to talk about the Wired article on why teens aren't partying anymore. I didn't have a chance to get to that one.
Yeah, and this is a quick one. I may want to punt the deeper discussion into a future episode, but basically the Wired article says that there is an overwhelming amount of data to suggest that kids aren't in physical social spaces anymore because that's moved largely to social media. And so the party experience, which used to be a critical part of the high school and college social scene, is now being largely replaced by social media and the connections that students apparently feel inside of those those platforms. And the reason why I mention this is because, for better or for worse, we can't deny that the technology is doing something here, right? I still think we're far, far away from understanding what and what the implications of those things are. And, the hand-wringing that's been inspired by the 2016 election, especially as it relates to Facebook and social media, certainly are starting to inspire that discussion at a deeper level. But let's not pretend that these technologies don't have a massive impact on humanity, right? And I'm not talking about, good or bad, right? That's a different discussion altogether. But let's not pretend that things haven't changed in the last 15 years and that this technology hasn't inserted an incredible disruptive force into our culture and our broader society. And so if you doubt that, I think watching teen and 20-something social patterns is a good way to understand that, right? If kids aren't partying, which is, by the way, the social experience for adolescents, right, then obviously something's going on. And
I think you can also take a look at driving. It's been interesting as 2 of our 3 teenagers have gone, to drive. Well, we've done driver's ed with them, and they've become independent drivers, and talking with other parents, and the incredulity, am I going to say that word right? Surprise that some parents have for, oh my gosh, I just wanted to get my driver's license as quick as I can. And if you have conversations with different parents, you'll probably find some that have kids that, just wasn't that excited about it. And it has got to have something to do with access to peers. I grew up in a day where there were some kids that had a phone in their room, but most of them didn't. I think my wife tells stories about having this long line and being able to sometimes drag a phone to her bedroom and close the door, and have a private conversation. But what a different world that we live in with respect to that. And so I think there could be some positives to that in terms of perhaps reductions in alcohol abuse or drug abuse, and self-destructive behaviors, but there's a huge side of this psychologically that isn't just about bullying, but it's also about peers. It's about identity. It's about the ways in which, teens can increasingly view themselves through the lens of likes and feedback that they're receiving on social media.
Yes.
And this is an essential part of digital citizenship education and just education overall, right? I'm not an anthropologist, but I've stayed in a Holiday Inn Express before and I've talked to some. And, identity formation is so huge. And I agree with you, Jason, that I think we're underestimating the power of this and the importance of this in shaping something as basic as identity, which is huge.
Right. And let's also be clear, banning cell phones from your classroom does not stop this transition, right? And I've not that I've gone full circle on this, I think it's so much more complex than banning or not banning here in 2018. But at the same time, it's, factors are impacting the way kids are interacting with humanity. And we have to acknowledge that, and we have to think about that critically as a broader educational field. And, I say it all the time, and part of this is my also feeling as a historian. There's been a few revolutions in history that have had the impact of, I think, the mass expansion of mobile devices. And the only one I can think of that's competitive is the invention of the printing press and the Gutenberg Bible and the mass expansion of religious texts that happened in Europe after the printing press was created. That was every history book talks about that as a earth-shattering invention, right? Well, that's what the cell phone has done for us, right? It has put the world's information in your pocket. It's provided you with instant communication with billions of people around the world at the touch of a button. And I'm not quite sure if we're quite grasping yet how powerful that earthquake in our culture is and will be in our culture.
Absolutely. I'll drop into our show notes. I'm going to be doing a 2-part social media and internet safety class for parents and grandparents by themselves, and then a second part that'll involve kids at our church. But then we're going to take that similar model and do that at school in March and in April. And anyway, we can talk a little bit more about that. But these conversations are critical, and part of what I'm hoping to do, in addition to highlight ways that we can, regulate and control and things, is, the power of these devices and the importance of having conversations about them and the choices that we're making and the ways in which they're shaping us. Because I think they're shaping us as whatever our age might be, as adults. They're shaping us just as they're shaping the kids. And it's important to try to have a better understanding of that. And perhaps at some point, take a step back and say, is this a choice that I want to make? And globally, in terms of the whole school and everything, the choice shouldn't just be, we're going to throw all of this away and try to bring back the Stone Age. It's going to be trying to work with these tools to hopefully mitigate and reduce the potential for negative and bad usage, and then amplify the good. So I think we need a Geek of the Week, Jason. We're a little bit past the top of the hour. You want to share yours, and then I'll do mine quickly.
Sure. I posted this article. I actually got a lot of traction on this on Twitter, and I've been testing it. And at a very low level, and it appears that the advice is sound. But there's a great article from 2 years ago from Digital Inspiration, which is actually keeps popping up on my feed for a reason. And I don't. The articles are quite interesting, but it's basically how to run a script that then allows you to host a podcast audio on Google Drive for free. Now, I'm guessing this is not industrial amounts of podcasting audio. If you have, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of episode hits, this is probably going to, Google's probably going to knock on your door and ask you to pay for something a little more industrial than the free Google Drive that's available to you. But if you're doing a school-based podcast or a classroom-based podcast that's getting dozens or hundreds or maybe even in the lower thousands of hits, there's an easy way for you to host a podcast audio on Google Drive for free, and then send that information off to iTunes when you submit your podcast for the purpose of then aggregating that throughout the system. So really interesting article, pretty easy steps to follow. I've done some basic testing. The advice seems sound, and an interesting tech solution if you're doing things like classroom podcasting.
Awesome. And mine real quickly is a Wirecutter article, the best cable modem. Did some research recently because I had bumped our internet to the what is it called? Ultimate, I guess, level, which was, we were at tier 3 and wanting to go up to tier 4, which would be 300 megabits down, where, you know, we'd been more in the 100 to 150. And I've been like, why are we not getting this bandwidth? And it's been 3 years since we updated our cable modem. We went from what's called a DOCSIS 2.0 to a 3.0 modem. And I thought, yay, I've arrived and this is all that we need. Well, come to find out that modems have different gradient speeds in terms of what they can handle capacity-wise as well. Our son out in Colorado for college this year in his own house, well, he's sharing a house with other guys. They ran into this because the wireless modem and router that they had initially was 100 base T instead of gigabit. And so they can get 300, you know, down, but they weren't able to get that when they wired in because it was only limited to 100. So anyway, this is just $60. You can pay easily $100 or $200 for these kinds of modems, but they have greater numbers of downstream channels and upstream channels. And so this is like a 16 by 4, and it says this is the you know what you need. And it's all, this particular one, which is $60 from Amazon. It's the Netgear CM500, is compatible with a wide range of ISPs as well. So in the not too distant future, I think we're going to be doing that, and hopefully that'll have a direct impact on our show. Perhaps I will not have to do my verbal enforcement of quality of service and force my family to all stream off of their cell phones, which they are doing right now during our show, and they will be elated when I say the show is over, because they'll go back to the standard internet. So
well, that they'll have 5G and then they won't care.
That's right. They'll just say, Dad, we don't even need this home stuff. So that'll be a while. But Jason, where can folks find you online?
Well, I'm at the Twitters at Tech Savvy Teach. I also blog for the Northwest Council for Computer Education, blogged on ncce.org. And then I also want to give a shout out to the Virtual Learning Leadership Alliance. And I keep forgetting what our domain is. Learning. I'm going to look it up on Google while I fill this with. It's virtuallearningalliance.org. And it's a group of over a dozen state virtual schools that work together on curriculum and advocacy issues related to state virtual schools. And I happen to know, because I'm involved in the project, that they were going to be expanding a little more into social media. So if you're interested how good quality state public programs can help provide options for students in public schools, the Virtual Learning Leadership Alliance is an excellent advocacy organization. It's doing really great work in the states where it's active. So virtuallearningalliance.org is another organization I am deeply involved in. So what about you, Mr. Fryer?
I remain W. Fryer on the Twitters. My blog is speedofcreativity.org. I started a painful process of migrating to a new web host, which I hoped I would be able to do over the holidays, and I failed miserably. And it also involves moving all of my 40-plus WordPress sites to SSL encryption, which ends up being a little bit more technical than just, you know, flipping a switch. But Speed of Creativity is the main place where I am writing, and I actually will go give a shout out to my wife, Shelley Fryer, who I think is going to be posting a little bit more on her blog this next year, shelleyfryer.com. So I definitely assist, and we're partners in crime and coming up with ideas for technology integration, and looking forward to actually co-leading a after-school Scratch Club with her, with third and fourth graders, as well as we hope some fifth and sixth graders that we will rope into that. So we appreciate you joining us and staying with us. We've been a little bit later than normal. Generally, we're about 62, 63 minutes on the podcast. You can catch us live here on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Mountain, 1400 UTC. Did you verify that, Jason? I'm gonna get some kind of a banner for the back of this and say 1400 UTC, because that will mean so much to our fans in England and the UK. But we continue to share our links and invite any feedback. Generally, I think you can always find a feedback survey, which has really been only taken once by a gentleman in Tasmania. We would love to have someone else take that survey, but we welcome all of your feedback. Tweet to us, let us know what you enjoyed in the show, what you'd like to hear us talk about. We will be doing a Chromebook show coming sometime soon, but that has not been announced yet. And until then, we encourage you to stay safe, stay savvy, be connected, and continue to share the knowledge with others. See you next time.
Good night.